Hey everyone, welcome to Reflections, the Wisdom of Edgar Cayce. Thank you so much for tuning in. We're coming to you courtesy of our broadcasting partner, moretalk.tv. And today on the show, we are diving into the A.R.E. archives. And this week, we're going to enjoy a wonderful lecture from one of my personal favorite Cayce scholars, Dr. Harmon Bro. Dr. Bro was a professor of philosophy and religion and a specialist in parapsychological aspects of religious life, including meditation, faith healing, mystical experiences, and conversion. He was ordained a minister in 1943 before serving as associate professor of religion and psychology at George Williams College in Chicago. He was a director of the education at Syracuse University and also director of the Institute for Research in Psychology and Religion. Bro had a very personal friendship with Edgar Cayce, and this led to his long relationship with the Association for Research and Enlightenment. His doctoral thesis, The Charisma of the Seer, was actually examined the life of Edgar Cayce. He was a frequent speaker at the A.R.E. and wrote a number of books before his death in 1997, including the recently re-released book, A Seer Out of Season. I highly recommend everyone pick up this book. It's one of my personal favorite books on the life and work of Cayce. I hope everyone enjoys our presentation from Dr. Harmon Bro.
This is the lecture given June the 20th, 1950 at the headquarters for the Association for Research and Enlightenment, located at Virginia Beach, Virginia. The speaker is Mr. Harmon Bro. His topic is The Seer and His Gift. As we join him, he has just been introduced by Mr. Eula Cayce.
Every time he comes to Chicago, when it gets too long, he gives me a nod. So I told him to see if he could do better. He did. In May of 1943, I first heard of Edgar Cayce. I had lunch with my mother in a downtown club in Chicago, and I discovered that she had gone off her rocker. She had just come back from seeing Mr. Cayce. She was writing a review of There Is a River for the Christian Century magazine, circulated to ministers around the country. And she was going to tell them she thought there was something to it. And I just about kissed her goodbye. Well, 6 years later, in May of 1949, I turned in at the largest divinity school in the world, the Federated Theological Seminaries at the University of Chicago, a 600-page manuscript. This is it. And it's on Edgar Cayce. You might have expected that it would happen that way. It happens that way with most of you. You finally showed up here after you first heard about this man and wondered what he was. Now, I debated a little bit the possibility of reading that manuscript to you here tonight. I think it's pretty good. Charles Thomas said here he'd listen to it. But, well, there's some big words in there, as Eula says, and I might stumble on a few of them. So we'll let it go, and I'll tell you a little bit about what happened between the time I first heard about Edgar Cayce and the time that thing wound up. Now, I hope next time I see you and talk with you, that's going to be a book with the Harper imprint on it, lying here on the table. As God willing, it will be, because it's already in the mill. But right now, I want to tell you about some of the insights I got into who Edgar Cayce was, what he was like, and what kind of a challenge he presents to us in 6 years of work to produce those 600 pages. Now, I got a reading from Edgar Cayce before I came down here. Many people have told you that their life readings, or someone has said to you, I'm sure, my life reading, when I read it, gave me the greatest thrill of my life. Well, let me tell you, they aren't all that way. Mine was a big disappointment to me. I wanted to go into church music. I made up my mind I was going to go into church music. I thought I was a pretty good choir director. And so when I sat down to get a reading and ask some questions at the end, I tried to hint pretty well that that's what he was supposed to say. If you were to look at my reading over there in the vault, you'll see this question that's along toward the end. Should I go into church music? Which I would like very much to do. I wasn't too sure about this guy, Cayce, and I thought if he was suggestible at all, I'd get in a few suggestions. Well, I got back to this life reading, and I was crushed. Because instead of telling me I should be a choir director, every time it got a chance, it told me to be a preacher. It told me to be a minister. Well, I felt awfully badly about it, and I talked over with my wife. I finally figured out that how it had happened. My mother was down here at the time the reading was given, and she wanted me to be a minister. And I figured the guy had some telepathic ability, and he just picked all that up and shouted out to me in Chicago. And then I came across a place where he said I'd been related to him in an earlier life. Well, boy, that fixed it. I figured he gave me all this stuff, and then he thought he'd butter me a little bit. Tell me as a relative of his. Well, I got a chance to come down here, finally. I decided I'd come down and I was going to help him out. I had got a degree from the University of Chicago after attending 2 other colleges, a couple of rather outstanding schools, and I felt I was pretty well educated. Had a couple of years of graduate work, and I knew my way around, thought I'd do the scientific method pretty well, and I could see that Mr. Cayce was in need of some help. So I decided to come down, and down I came in October 1943. Hugh Lynn was gone. They needed someone here to help with all kinds of things, put out the bulletin and meet visitors and read the mail and hold the secretary's hands, anything to keep the all put together. So I went to work. No. I expected a lot of things when I came down here. I had a lot of ideas in my mind about what I was going to find. And in just about every single case, I was wrong. Now, I can tell you some of the things that I expected to find when I came. I expected to find the physical readings were fairly solid, because I had read There Is a River and talked to a few people, and I thought there's probably some truth in it. But on the other hand, I figured out that these physical readings were rather inefficient, that they were picking up a very low level of medical information. They were picking up herbs and packs and some devices you pin on and stuff like that. And that if somebody could help him really focus this, he'd pick out the big top-name drugs and some of the other things. Well, I came and I found the physical readings they were sound all right. They were a lot sounder than I ever dreamed. They were getting the information they ought to be getting. That was surprise number one. Well, I figured then I'd see some pretty good clairvoyant stunts, a few of them, when I got down here, that this guy would actually be able to pick up some thoughts from somewhere and maybe be able to describe a few things. Well, I must have seen thousands of clairvoyant stunts. I saw and heard things in these readings as I sat day by day with my notebook that bowled me over again and again. I'd drop my jaw and drop my pencil and pick up both again and start over. It was incredible, the things that this fellow described lying there on that couch asleep. I recall the case of a man up in Alaska who apparently just as the reading got started, got up and started to walk away, and Mr. Cayce under his breath said, "Come on back here and sit down. It's time for the reading." The fellow wrote back later and said it happened that way. I recall the time he gave a reading for a man in California. It was early in the morning out there. It was a morning reading here and much earlier there, and he began the reading by saying, right nice looking pajamas. By the time I'd added all those things up together, I'd seen an awful lot of clairvoyance. Much more than I ever expected to. That's surprise number two. Thirdly, I expected to find what was wrong with Mr. Cayce's religious notions. It seemed to me that he had a pretty good instrument here, the psychic ability, and it had gotten followed up somewhere when it came to this religious stuff. That he apparently got it tuned on the mind of somebody else who was kind of mixed up. Or else he had stuck onto a book somewhere, and I knew he was good with books. I figured maybe he soaked up the wrong material and I was going to straighten him out, or help him to get it straightened out. Well, of course, I was the guy that needed straightening out, and I didn't know that. I came, as many another young person comes out of the seminaries of today, really not believing in God in any very meaningful way. I believed in my fellow man. I knew how much work there was to be done in this world, how much goodness and love had to be shown, and I didn't think God had very much to do with it. I knew there was a word like that, and there might be somebody around like that, but I didn't pay much attention to it. Well, that was surprise number three, because through the readings of Edgar Cayce, I found God, and it changed my life. And I am a minister, and I'm not going to quit being a minister. It happened. Surprise number three. Well, there were more of them. I expected to find a man pretty puffed up. Well, I mean, who could do all this without feeling, he's got all of that ability and so on. Well, Edgar Cayce wasn't that kind of a fellow. Oh, sometimes he got feeling pretty good when all these ladies clustered around him, but he could get hold of himself, and a powerful humility was in that man. An overwhelming humility. I'd sit there at the Bible class sometimes in the evening and look at him, and I couldn't believe it. Couldn't believe it. That was another surprise. I expected a man who would pose as a saint. Who could have a gift like this without being a saint? I mean, I expected a guy who would claim never to do wrong, who would be an ascetic, a perfect example of all the right things, you know? Well, he didn't. He didn't pose as a saint. Never claimed to be. He laughed whenever you talked to him about that. He kidded about the way he smoked cigarettes all the time and liked to eat plenty and enjoyed having a good time in life. Never claimed to be a saint. And that surprised me. I expected to tell the truth that I'm a very simple person. Because I got the impression from reading There Is a River, this man's a sort of a victim of circumstances who had this thing happen to him and kind of drifted along, one thing batting on him after another, and he was going to be a very simple man. Well, I found that I was wrong there, too. A keen mind, strong conviction, a strong will, many facets to his personality, a very dramatic and able speaker, all kinds of things I never expected. I thought he would be, well, to look at him, I expected to see a rugged, deep-set face with piercing eyes and all that. And I found an open face, a calm, sort of a bland face. In fact, a face that could hide an awful lot. And many a time I couldn't figure out what he was thinking, and a lot of other people couldn't either. Surprise there. Well, there were more surprises. I expected to find a peaceful little country doctor, sort of an office with a staff who was, just kind of moping along, doing a few little things very simply. I walked into a turmoil with thousands of coronet letters pouring in here. Well, lots of us came with the wrong ideas. I came expecting to find him going through some rigmarole getting ready to give these readings. Maybe incense or a few little things anyway. There must have been nothing screwy. I got here and there wasn't any. He just walked in town and talked a little while, and then he was quiet a little while, and then lay down and went to sleep. I was disappointed again. Nothing like that. Well, I thought, surely this man is human enough to have a weakness about money. All of the people that I'd ever met that had anything unusual capitalized on it when they got a chance. I figured Edgar Cayce would do that too. Well, he didn't. I'd open the letters that came in, and there'd be money in them. Just a gift, because somebody liked what he was doing. He'd say, put it back and send it back. We don't take money except for memberships here, and we don't give memberships unless we're going to give them some service. And back it would go. Gee, I saw all that money going away there. Well, and then I got to discovering when I looked through some of Mary's cards here that he wasn't collecting for a lot of these readings. If they didn't send him money, he never asked for it. And that bowled me over. Here was a man with utter integrity who never went grasping for money on the basis of this work. Well, lastly, I thought in his religious life I'd probably find a kind of a traditional, shallow Sunday school religion. Kind of a small-town, peaceful, church-going religion in his personal life. And I was wrong again. It was a deep thing in his life. One little occasion symbolized it for me so well, I've long remembered it. Somebody called him up one night, some mother, and said, "My little boy's getting well. We followed the directions in the reading. He's okay now." And he was very sick. Mr. Cayce put down the telephone and he told me about it. Then he walked back to his office, and I started out of the building. And I'd forgotten something. I came back in. He didn't know I'd come back in. And there he was back in his office, and I heard him saying, "Thank you, God. Thank you, God. Thank you, God." All alone by himself back there. And that showed me some things. That showed me a lot. And I saw more. Well, it's awfully hard to say what Edgar Cayce was and who he was. I put down some things here on a piece of paper when I was writing up this manuscript, and I filched a couple of those sheets tonight to just give you some of the many facets of that man. What was he? A one-time farm boy, a Sunday school teacher, a man who liked to read Collier's magazine, a Bing Crosby fan, a fisherman. He loved to fish out there on that dock, a small-town photographer, father of two boys that saw that they got the education he didn't have. He was the husband of a quick-minded wife who liked to go dancing about once a year. He was a steady-paying customer at the grocery, and they liked him. He was a house owner with a workshop out in his garage. He liked steak, and he liked cigarettes. He was a storyteller, and he was a good one. He was a Southerner that hung Lee's picture just a little higher than Lincoln. He was a grandfather, and he'd rather stop and play with Tommy than do anything else on earth. He was a dog lover. He liked dogs. He wasn't much of a musician. He was sentimental about his mother. He liked new cars, but he didn't drive very well. He prayed before meals. He liked to wear an old hat. This is a man that had an ability that made thousands of people interested in religion in a brand new way. People that didn't know him very well, he kind of was an awesome, mysterious symbol that blended in with his reading. To those who knew him very well, he was a lovable, difficult, generous, strong-minded man who battled all of his life to be worthy of those readings that streamed from him while he lay on his couch. Well, I left Virginia Beach. Afterwards, I wish I hadn't. But I went on to study church music because I was supposed to be a minister and work in the churches. Mr. Cayce died while I was gone. I came back then and worked for 6 more months. And I kept asking myself, what am I going to do about this man? What am I going to make of all this stuff? What am I going to do with what I've seen and heard? I couldn't be too sure. I finally decided at the end of that period, when Eula Allen finally came back, I would go back to Chicago and do some more graduate study. So I packed up my little Model A, because that's what I had over here with all my worldly belongings, and my wife and I got ready to go to Chicago. Just before we got ready to leave, we said, Eula Allen, will you go over our life readings with us and see that we're going to do the right thing now? So he did, word by word, all the way through. And it came to a spot where it said you should finish up your education at Harvard or Princeton or Yale. And he said, you ought to go there. I said, I've written to them and asked if I could come work on this material from the readings. And they said, no, they haven't got anybody like that to counsel me and they're not interested. He said, but it says you should go there. Oh, but I can't. They won't let me in. I haven't got a job. I haven't got any money. He said, well, that's not my doing, but the reading says you should go there. So we talked a little further, and then we got on a whole new set of road maps, and we went to Harvard. It didn't look very good when I landed there. We were broke. All the money we had was $5 that Catherine Patterson had stuck in my wife's pocketbook, and we didn't know about it until we found it. And Harvard wasn't going to let me in, but after a little while it began to shape up, and pretty soon I was working hard on the readings in every class I took. Bang through, got a graduate degree there, came out with the highest grades I possibly could. It was easy. All I had to do was just keep looking for things that tied up with the readings. Studying was fun. There was no problem at all. I finished at Harvard, went to the University of Chicago, and I was covering ground. I thought I was going to have to get somewhere. Lucky enough to tie up with a man who was probably the world's greatest scholar in the field of history of religions, which is that's what I'm going to talk about in a couple of minutes here. A man named Joachim Bach, who Eula Allen has met, a thought-off short guy from Germany, a bachelor, his whole life devoted to learning. And he showed me a lot of things I didn't know and gave me some background against which to set. Edgar Cayce. Now, it was hard going. And I started telling these folks at Harvard that I thought there was something to reincarnation and that I was up at Harvard because some guy had told me so in his sleep. He turned around and walked off. I took an oral exam at the University of Chicago, a doctorate oral exam. It was the longest one on record. Because when we got started, there was an awful lot of questions I wanted to ask. But we fought through. Here is the result. Now, the question I asked myself was this: what kind of a religious leader is Edgar Cayce? Because he was a religious leader. Everything about him I could discover was religious. He seemed to have his very roots sunk in religion. His Sunday school class meant everything to him, it seemed, when he was down there. His heart was in it. His Bible classes here. His counseling with people was on the basis of the Bible. His readings, he said, he would only give so long as they brought Christ to the people that got them. And he quit, he said, as soon as they failed to do that. So my job was to find out whether there was anybody else anywhere in the history of the world like this guy, who was a religious counselor of this same type. Now, I knew that there were others working on other aspects of Mr. Cayce's work, body count, and others working on the clairvoyant aspect. I set out after the religious stuff. Well, began to look around at other religious leaders in the history of religion, and I found great confusion. People were bewildered. First of all, they weren't sure what a leader was. Is he a people that had 10 followers or 2? Is the person who had 10 followers or 2, is he a person who works with ideas or with people? There was confusion there. There was confusion on what religion was, and there still is among historians of religion and social scientists. Confusion on what magic is and how leaders differ. So I got out all the books I could get my hands on and studied. Sociology, social psychology, anthropology, and history of religion. Until finally some pieces began to fall in place. I worked out some concepts, gathered every bit of material I could find on religious leadership, and I've got it there. It's the first time it's ever been done in any scholarly literature. Had to get the tools ready. make it myself to dig out the material to find a background against which to set Edgar Cayce. Well, I got the tools lined up and began to find out some things. I found out, first of all, that the sociological types that the scholars were using were no help to me. Edgar Cayce wasn't a founder of a religion. That's one type, widely discussed. Jesus, Buddha, Muhammad, many others. He was no founder of religion. Well, he wasn't even a disciple of a founder of a religion. He didn't study anybody's feet and then go tell about it. He wasn't an apostle. He didn't go around founding churches. He wasn't even a reformer like Luther or Calvin or some of the Hindu reformers or some of the great Buddhist reformers. He just didn't study. So I had to find some other categories. And I began to explore psychological categories then to see if it were possible that one could set up types in terms of the gifts that religious leaders had claimed to possess. Because I discovered outside of our own culture, where we preachers can preach without having any ability. In other cultures, religious leaders always have unusual gifts of some sort. Either they have them or they claim them, but it's there. It's part of their job. And I began to explore those kinds of gifts. And I found that they fell into categories. First of all, there were those whose gift was simply being what they were. They were saints. They did perfectly what they knew to do. And their fellows discovered them and followed them because they were godlike. Well, I knew Mr. Cayce wasn't entirely in that category, and I'm sure if you called him a saint to his face, he'd grin awfully wide. So I wasn't going to leave him in that pigeonhole, and I started looking for some more. I found there were those with the gifts that enabled them to bring about changes. We have wonder workers who can move rocks, who can get fire to come down from heaven. We have healers that can bring about things in the body. We have priests who can bring about a new relationship of the soul to God by working with individuals. These are people who bring about by the power given them. Well, Edgar Cayce didn't do very much of that. He didn't go around healing people. He didn't go around telling them he was saving their souls while he was mumbling something. He didn't do that. So he had to fit in the last category, and that was those who see things. There are an awful lot of those. So I knew he belonged somewhere in that group of people that could see things that the rest of us can't. That was the kind of a claim that he made, or that was made about him. But then there were quite a few of people who could see things. Well, first of all, I discovered, as you all have, mediums, as one type of people who claim to see and do see more than the rest of us. And I found that the most widely spread single kind of person who can see of any of the types. Every culture in the world has that kind of person. Australia, China, India, Arabia, Africa, the American Indians, the Eskimos, all that type is common. But Edgar Cayce didn't fit. His voice didn't change. He didn't go into a frothy state or any jerking and twitching. He didn't use somebody else's vocabulary. In fact, in his readings, he kept saying, "Don't do that. It's dangerous. You don't know what you're hooking up with. You don't know what's going to happen to this body and mind and soul of yours." So he didn't fit there. I had to look around for something else. Well, I found diviners. A lot of them. Especially down here in Babylon and Assyria. Over here in Rome. They did it with sheep slivers over here. They did it with birds flying across the sky. Over here they did it with stars. They had many different ways. Over in China they did it with sticks. Diviners. People who would use external symbols. Objects they would manipulate. Or some natural phenomenon they would observe. And on the basis of that, they would counsel their fellow men. That didn't fit Edgar Cayce. I never saw him manipulating anything. He's a good card player, but he didn't use them to read from. And while I've been on many a walk with him, or stood out on the fishing pier out there, I never saw him setting the heavens for his guidance. That didn't fit. Then I came across a prophet, and I thought, aha, here we've got it now. Prophets, the ones we know best about, are, of course, those down here in Palestine. Although there are prophets among the Bantus of Africa, at least pretty closely resembling that type, and maybe some in India. But I discovered he didn't fit too well there either, because the prophet seemed to be a man whose inspiration fell on him when he wasn't expecting it. He couldn't control it. It hit him. It possessed him, as it did Jeremiah. He was a man who went out and stopped people on the street corners and told them his message, and gave his message to groups. Edgar Cayce didn't do that. I never caught him on the street corner, talking to people, lecturing them in a trance. It wasn't his way. So I couldn't call him a prophet. Well, that left me with the seer as a category. and I discovered it fit pretty well. These things we know about seers, that they find their gifts. They're not trained for it as the diviners are. Diviners are given a lore which they study, and they learn to manipulate. Seers discover that they can do it in almost every culture where we find them. We find that seers stay home and wait for somebody to come to them for counsel. They don't go out running around offering free advice. Edgar Cayce did that. We find that they give their counsel to individuals. They work with individual souls instead of with large groups. Edgar Cayce did that. We find that that religious seers give the credit for their gift to a power more than they. A power which, whatever they call it, they apprehend as that other which cuts across their path and is more than they are. Friends and enemies. Judging them, loving them. Edgar Cayce did that. We find that there's, around seers, very little of an institution. Churches don't grow up around these fellows and these women. Their tongues are too sharp. They see too far in. They speak the facts. People don't like to build churches around folks like that. They see too much. They undercut our little pettiness and our fancy rituals. Edgar Cayce had no church around him, only the association. And that hasn't always been a very powerful group in itself. We find a wide distribution of followers for seers, from kings down to nobodies. If there was ever a wide distribution of followers, they're the people whose names are on the list over there, and you and me, from all walks of life, from all over the country, from all kinds of problems. He seemed to be a seer. Well, I found that there were no books about seers, that all this information had to be pieced together from journals and reports, that there isn't yet a single, solid, thorough study of the seer as a type. I had to write one then. The question I then started to ask, and I'm just going to run through it quickly with you, is this. Where were there people like this before? Where can we find them? What were their names? What did they do? And here we go. I'll show you. It seems a shame to give away free all this knowledge I had to pay so hard for and work so hard for. In Australia, a man named Elkin has reported clairvoyance there among the native tribes that have unusual abilities, as high as any clairvoyance we know in the West and probably higher. But it doesn't seem to be as mature and highly developed a religious orientation as, of course, we would find in Edgar Cayce's work. They're clairvoyance without the religious connotation. In Oceania, all these islands down here in the South Pacific, we find that while there are highly gifted seers, people who can see Earth, that they don't qualify as religious seers in several ways. They're sorcerers, most of the gifted people in that area, and they work miracles, or attempt to, more than they attempt to counsel on the basis of their clairvoyant ability. Move over to Tibet, up in here, wherever it is, right in there somewhere, and we find the shaman as the type, the characteristic type. And I've got his name up here, haven't I? That's the name of a man who usually, however, is a medium, instead of being a pure clairvoyant who can see without going into a case of transposition. We look around then, come down here to Africa, and we find some of the Bantu prophets coming very near to the type of being seers, but still, oftentimes, simply clairvoyant. What should we say? Fortune teller, giving advice, but without that terrific orientation against the will of God, which we look for in a deeply religious seer. South America, little or nothing is known yet about primitive tribes in South America and what's available there. The American Indians we know more. The Plains Indians, up in here, are almost individuals almost made themselves seers. And the pattern, each Indian in his tribe, in order to become accepted, had to go off away from his people and spend anywhere from 2 nights or more to a couple of weeks alone, fasting, till he had a vision, till he possessed his soul, till he found out who he was and what he was, until he got hold of God, is what it amounts to. And some of those people, whom we call medicine men, turned out to be highly gifted seers. And sometimes the religious implications were of a very high order. A one God, and his will to be followed. The Plains Indians are one of the most exciting groups to study, to look for seers. We move over into California over here. Bruce Underwood has done a very fine study of the Papago Indians. And there we had 2 types of shaman, of medicine men, of big wheels, religious people. The kind who saw what needed to be done for healing, or for the tribe's warfare, or for hunting. And then the kind who made it come about, the healers and the wonder workers. Clear division between seers and people who bring about things. Let's see, where else can we skip along to? The Zuni Indians down here, well known. No, sir. Very highly formalized, ritualized religion among them. No people with high gifts like this, so far as we can discover. Eskimos up here, they have it. Apparently they have it. And they still have it. They're called shaman in the anthropological literature. But apparently some of these people are not simply mediums, but they have highly developed clairvoyant abilities of their own and sometimes use it against a very rich and meaningful religious background. That would be a quick summary of the savage tribes, if you want to call them that, the primitives, the pre-literates that we know anything about. Let's take a look at the extinct religions and see what we found out there about where there are people of abilities somewhat like Edgar Cayce. Start with Egypt, down here. We have apparently people with seer ability who are called Honu. What they did, little is known about, except that they counseled without divining devices. We get over here into Assyria and Babylonia, mostly diviners, officials, connected with the temple, but a few lone wolves who did it without sticks and stones and stars. They had the ability. They were called Baru. In Rome, not much record of seers at all. I can't find any as yet. Up here among the Celts, over here, still no record of seers, although some highly able people for perceiving things in a trance state of possession. Down here in the Germanic tribes, no known record of seers. In Greece, finally we pick up something. Here we have what you all know by the name of oracles. People who had temples in which there sat a particular seer, usually a woman, called a Sibyl, female seer. Also other names were given, the Magus and the Vakis, who were seers of one type and another, who would counsel, very much like, now we're going to see an interesting pattern of comparison. People would come from all over Greece to these temples, and there they would ask for counsel, and it would be given. But it wasn't given as clearly. They were given in complicated symbology. Somebody else had to interpret it. Whether possession was involved is not clear. In the Oracle of Delphi, there was a Sibyl, a woman, who had to sit on a tripod, apparently, up over fumes. The fumes so worked upon her, apparently opened the centers, that she became infused and then could speak. And her words were translated by a priest. Awful lot more complicated than what Edgar Cayce did. But it was apparently real seer counsel. There were no churches formed around these people, just a temple where they operated. Moving on from Greece, we come over to the Aztecs over here. Something is known about them. They had people, gifted leaders called A.R.E, who were apparently able to do some of this seer counseling. And now lastly, the living religion. What do we have there? Over here in Japan, in the Shinto, and behind that, the earlier race which inhabited Japan, we have a figure called the A.R.E. Little is known about them. I've been talking this last year with a fellow who was born in Japan, who's now an Episcopal priest in this country, but knows a lot about native Japanese culture. And he's been sending letters over, collecting data on these people in small villages who have the kind of counseling ability I've been hunting all over the world for, so that we can draw some comparisons between them and Edgar Cayce. In Japan, over here in China, apparently some of the classic Taoist priests had high seer ability. Now, the present-day Taoist priests, if I may say so, I hope they're not here, are a bunch of fakers. They wear yellow robes and run around and pretend to do magic. But the early Taoist priests, those back not long after the Tao Te Ching was written, Lao Tzu did his great teaching work, were apparently men of high spiritual achievement and great psychic power, and they counsel individuals on the basis of their seer gifts. In Confucian history, nothing. You can't find anything at all. The state religion, and those who were able to do anything were largely priests and wonder workers. No seers that I can turn up yet, although the literature is very poor on Chinese and Japanese religion. In Buddhist history, now we begin to find some more evidences of seers. There are stages of spiritual development for Buddhists. One of them is that of the A.R.E. And oftentimes, the man who has achieved that high stage of spiritual development counsels his fellows as a seer. One of the most exciting places on earth is here in northern Buddhism, Mahayana Buddhism, as it unfolds and develops. Very, very close to Christianity. In some ways, I think, a lot more profound than the Christianity we peddle around today. See some of the truths that may very well have been in Christianity earlier and got smothered over a little bit. In southern Buddhism, Hinayana, down here in Indochina, no records for the time being. Over in India, we seem to have some records. The yogi, a man who has practiced yoga to the point where he can call forth psychic abilities. Apparently can do some counseling. We have the word seer in Hindu literature, and when it's translated, the word is rishi, that it means one who sees. They are the ones that gave some of the historic texts of the Hindu religion. And finally we have the guru, whom you know as a religious teacher in India. Well, let's keep on almost down here, over to Islam, Mohammedanism, and we find a figure there called, I've been forgetting to point these out, a Kahi, who also apparently had counseling ability without being a diviner or a medium. But little is known yet about that particular kind of figure, and not much about contemporary people like that. Among the Parsis, the remnants of Zoroastrianism today, no record, no evidence so far. Then we skip over here to this little tribe of people that stood the world on its head, the Jewish people, from whose midst came the Christian religion and the Mohammedan religion, and we find a terrific tradition of seerdom there. There's much in the Bible about seers, very much. You know many of these stories. You know of Santa. You know about the gifts of seeing that are told of as being religious gifts. And the Hebrew words were what? Kozek, Roech. The two terms used to describe seers. Later there were prophets, whether that was an uphill or a downhill change remains to be figured out by those who are working in that field. Well, there's the picture. And when you ask about Christianity, I don't think you find very many seers. Some of the early Quakers, and I put their name down at the bottom, seem to have had the ability to do some counseling on the basis of a deeply religious orientation and a strong clairvoyant gift. And they went about in their Quaker centers up in the New England states and in Pennsylvania, and they would come to a meeting house. As part of their quiet period, they would begin to counsel individuals in the room on what their work should be, on what their health problems were, and how they could meet them. They seemed to have quite a lot of ability of a genuine seer type. Now, there have been a few individuals in Western culture, Western Christian culture. I've turned up about half a dozen in the last 150 years. Never knew there were so many who had closely comparable abilities to Edgar Cayce. And they'll make another talk some other time. Well, what do we find then as we look it over? I find that Edgar Cayce is unique. That he did more for more people over a longer period of time than anybody in recorded history of that type of gift. The range of his vision, health problems, vocational problems, packed lives, philosophical truths, historical facts. There's no evidence of other people being able to do that. The religious maturity of what he said, the deeply ethical framework in which counsel was handed out, the will of God that stood behind whatever he said and challenged us, to whom he gave his guidance, simplicity of what he did and how he did it. No mumbo jumbo, no fancy church about it. He just served, so simply. Alexis, now I want to ask you, what do we do about it? What does it mean? Edgar Cayce was here, Virginia Beach, right here, right there. And I think he was the most highly gifted religious leader since the master he served, as far as I can find out. He had only one kind of ability. Jesus had many kinds. But it looks like God got awfully tired of waiting around for us to wake up. He pulled the curtains aside a little bit, and he let some light shine through. A lot of it. An awful lot of it. He picked a soul that had a lot of problems to solve, and he trusted him. He gave the job to him to do, and he did it. God's trust, I think, was not misplaced. Edgar Cayce did it. Now, what does it mean? What does it mean? A lot of wonders, a lot of strange things happen. You know what I think it means? I think it all means this, that God cares. That he cares about us. That no matter how busy we are, how crazy we are, how self-centered we are, he hasn't given us up. He lets some light come through. Somebody asks you, what does it mean, remember? Remember the word care. I thought I was thinking A.R.E, Association for Research and Enlightenment. Put a C on it for Cayce and you've got it. That's how it stacks up. God cares. But this is a time almost like Noah's time, and the readings seem to say so, as though catastrophe is coming, and not far off. The sensuality of our time. How ironic that this work should be set in Virginia Beach, where people run up and down trying to find some last little bit of enjoyment they can wring out of life. A little hot sun, a drink, some gambling, anything to divert themselves from the real goals of living. And into the midst of this, like a flower growing in the midst of manure, this delicate blossom, God's own gift, Edgar Cayce's work. What are we going to do about it? This obscure man, pulled up out of nowhere. Who was he? A preacher? A theologian? A photographer? And God picked him. What do? We go around telling his story? Sure, we tell his story. We've got to tell his story. It's like high voltage electricity. Unless you tell it, it'll burn you alive. That sound nuts? Do we start changing things on the basis of it? Sure we do. I'm going to change the Christian church as much as I can. Buddy Kahn's going to change psychological theories as much as he can. The rest of you can change an awful lot of things. Medicine, your own home, your own community, on the basis of what came through these readings. But that's not enough. God doesn't want just publicity. He doesn't need public relations. God doesn't want just a saved society. He knows no society is any better than the people in it. What he wants is changed lives. And he wants it from us. And that's what we do with Edgar Cayce. We ought to become different. Very different. Someday, you and I are going to hear a voice, a very disturbing voice, that's going to say, I let you in on Edgar Cayce. What did you do with him? I helped you find him. What did you do with him? And we're going to answer that. You know, I heard the angel Michael speak once here. You'd think that'd be a great thrill, wouldn't you? You'd think that'd be a great and wonderful occasion. Michael broke into a reading when I was sitting over there and talked to us. You know what he called us? We're nice people. Gladys was there. She's the nearest thing to a saint I know. Mrs. Cayce was there. A number of us were there. You know what Michael called us? Pigs! Pigs! And God said we are. That's how far we are from what we ought to be in the light of these readings. Little squirmy, mean, selfish, proud people. Grumbling around here, grabbing up little bits of glamour from the work that Edgar Cayce did. When we ought to be transformed souls, cleansed, radiant, made new because of what we've seen. If Michael were here, what would he do with us tonight? Huh? What would he say? Would he pat us on the back and say, you nice, sweet people? I don't know, he might call us the same name again. When he got through, I walked around this corner here, so shaking I could hardly stand up. And I was crying, too, because that was the most horrible experience of my life. Not because Michael spoke, but because I saw myself. That's what the readings of Edgar Cayce have got to do. We've got to change. That's what we do with them. That's what he means. We got to be different. Now, don't come up and tell me that you like this talk later on this week. I don't want to hear that stuff. It might satisfy you, make you think you're released. You're not. You've got to change, and I've got to change. I can see it in your face when you start wiping out some of that stuff that's in your face and in my face. We got to be different people. That's what we do with these readings. We got to go home in our communities, and they'll see it and know it. And when you get stuck, when you forget, pin these words on your heart that came in so many life readings at the end. Pin them there like a badge of honor. Study to show thyself approved, a workman not ashamed, rightly dividing the words of truth, keeping self unspotted from the world. For know, thy God hath given thee much. He doth expect from thee much. Let us pray. O God, we thy children are so very slow. Thou hast shown us so much, and we're so slow. But we're coming. We're prodigal children, and at last we want to come home, and we're on our way. Wait for us, God. Give us the strength, for we're on our way. Amen.
Hope everyone enjoyed our presentation today from Dr. Harmon Bro. If you'd like to read more about Edgar Cayce, you can always pick up Harmon Bro's wonderful book, A Seer Out of Season, and that can be picked up at A.R.E.catalog.com. To learn more about Edgar Cayce's incredible legacy and all the wonderful services offered here at the Association for Research and Enlightenment, you can visit our website at edgarcayce.org. On behalf of everyone here at the Association for Research and Enlightenment, and of course moretalk.tv, I'm your host Brenton Bickerstaff, encouraging everyone to continue to seek out your own personal truth. It's in the seeking that we find ourselves and bring our gifts out into the world. Thank you so much for tuning in to Reflections this week, and I will see you next week. Now it's time for the Thought for the Day here on Reflections. And joining me as always is Dr. Bill Austin. Bill, thank you so much for joining us today on Reflections for the Thought for the Day.
Greetings, Brett. Always a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Absolutely, my pleasure. And if you can go ahead and read the Thought for the Day today for our listeners.
I'd be happy to. This thought comes from reading 3492-1. Man in his nature, physical, mental, and spiritual, is a replica, is a part of the whole universal reaction in materiality. That's quite a statement. You know, the readings always talk about the spirit being the life, the mental really the active force, and the physical being the result. And that in this material world, I think that's the nature of everything that's alive. There's a spirit or the life within it. There is some sort of mental capacity, that is helping to direct the physical forces within the body of that entity or that living being. And that's what we are. We're a replica of that within, whether you're talking about the cell, an individual cell within the body, or the whole organism itself, whether that be man or animal, that this scenario is how it works here. And that we, as human beings, men and women, we have the ability to really attune ourselves to that divine nature. And I think that's what makes us really unique as human beings. We have the ability to align ourselves with the spiritual forces that makes everything right. It's an interesting reading.
Yeah, absolutely. I personally really like this reading because it's in line with a lot of things that I study in relation to the Cayce material, but other sources outside of the Cayce material. But I love that everything seemed to come out in the readings, and that's the beauty of it. I read a lot of other material, and I always find the connections with the Cayce material as if the foundation was laid for me by the Cayce material, and I can always find these beautiful connections. For me personally, this connection, I love spirit science. I love kind of what science has to tell us about the beauty and the depth and the incredible complexity of the human body. And this one really hits it on the head. It says, man in his nature, physical, mental, and spiritual, is a replica, is a part of the whole universal reaction to materiality. And what I love about science is they're showing us that everything on a small scale, from the subatomic scale, the building blocks that make up our body, as well as the larger, maybe say the organs like your brain. And then if you go further, you look at larger structures on a global scale, or on a scale of the cosmos. And what they find is that many things within nature, maybe say the root system of a tree, has the exact same structure as something like the neuron fibers in our brains. It's identical. Or the optic fibers in our eye. And then if you go to an even larger scale, you find that if you look at the galactic layout of a galaxy, something like the Milky Way, you can see that it's all created using the same structure, the same geometries. And this is basically shows, it's what science is showing us, that everything in nature is built upon this same structure. Some people call it the mind of God. And it has this fundamental connection that is, if you look at it in a metaphysical or spiritual perspective, it shows that it's basically scientific proof in a way of how we are truly all interconnected. You can see this connecting thread, that everything is kind of laid out in the same way, because God is truly working through everything. And that spirit, that the energy that holds the whole universe, the whole cosmos together, is what holds together something like, one of our organs in our body. It's that same energy that just enlivens everything. So I love that Cayce truly recognized this, and he brings it up in a number of readings. This one is really beautifully worded, to just saying that we are a part of the whole universal reaction of materiality. So if you take the cosmos and you study them long enough, you'll find that it's what makes us up. I mean, if you think about, more recently, I've been reading some stuff about cosmology, and the Big Bang created all the elements. The creation of the universe was created all the elements that make up our bodies. So if you look at our body, we are truly stardust, is what the cosmologists like to say, is that we are part and parcel of the cosmos. We're made of the same stuff that's making up, building galaxies out in the cosmos right now. So for me, that really is awe-inspiring, and it humbles you, and it makes you realize that there is something larger than you. Whether you're a scientist or somebody who tends more towards a spiritual background. And I think the beauty of it is it's truly bringing science and spirituality together to have this enlightened perspective of what really goes on in the cosmos, and how we, are part and parcel of that.
Yes. We are part of and have the potential to be conscious of being one with all in the universe, because we are an individual universe, but yet part of the whole universe. It's a fascinating reading, fascinating thought.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one that I think it's a meditative thought in a sense. It really helps to expand our mind, and I think also when we talked about the ego in previous Thought for the Days, it helps to put the ego in balance and keep it in check, because the ego is in a sense gets very small-minded. It's what keeps us individuated, and kind of sometimes can work to help us forget that we are truly interconnected to all other living things, everything else in the cosmos, really. Yeah.
You had a statement earlier that I really liked. You said you like to read other things besides the Cayce material. You have a wide range of things that you'll read, but you really like things that deal with this concept of the spirit and its thread through the universe, and that the Cayce material is really a foundation for you. And I agree, it really has been for me. And sometimes I'll be reading something else, and I'll go back and I'll read the Cayce material. I feel like I'm looking at, well, gee, what did Cayce have to say about this? What did the Cayce readings have to say about this? And it's absolutely amazing. I haven't not found something that relates to what my question is of, how did the Cayce materials, what do they say on this? It's fascinating.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. For me personally, I came from a very scientific background. So when I first discovered the Cayce material years ago, I did a scientific, experiment for years, where I was testing the Cayce material against other material that I deemed, very from a very good source. And as I do that over the years now with Cayce as my foundation, I find it actually enriches the Cayce material too, because as you go back after reading other material, kindred material with the Cayce material, you go back to the Cayce material and you find things in the Cayce material that have new meaning now that you have another I guess source, another
Yes.
perspective to bring to that Cayce material.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. It's
Yeah,
fascinating.
wonderful. Yeah. Well, Bill, thank you so much for joining us today for the Thought for the Day. It is always an honor to have you on the show.
Oh, my pleasure, Brent. Thank you for having me. I look forward to seeing you next week.
Absolutely. I'll see you next week.
Okay.
Great. Okay. Okay, we'll reset.
Okay. Right. Now it's time for the Thought for the Day here on Reflections. And joining me, as always, is Dr. Bill Austin. Bill, thank you so much for joining us today on Reflections. Honor to have you on.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for having me, Brent.
Of course. My pleasure. And if you can go ahead and read the Thought for the Day for our listeners.
I'd be happy to. This thought comes from reading 254-68. Blessed then are they that make their wills one in accord with him, as they seek to know, Lord, what would you have me do? This is such a common question. Lord, what would you have me do?
Mm-hmm.
And I feel that if we keep in mind, or we're coming from a place of let thy will be done, let thy will, not mine, but thy will be done in and through me, we'll be shown what needs to be done. And we'll be guided in how to do it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love this one. And it's one that I've been working a lot with personally lately. This is an actual mantra that I've been working with. Lord, what would you have me do? And also, not my will, but thy will, O Lord. And it comes to me always in moments where I reach a point where I can't. I feel like I can't find the answers, and I feel like I'm hitting a wall, and I'm not seeing clearly the picture for what it is, my life for what it is. And what this does for me is it brings me back in the moment, because I think when you realize that there is this higher power, this creative force, this universal energy that's working through you, it allows you to take a step back into the moment, because I think so often we can get caught up in our minds and we can step out of the moment, we can lose the moment. And I think when you put faith and when you put trust in knowing that there is something larger at works behind the scenes, whether you see it in the moment or not, it also helps to create this immense sense of peace, realizing that this might seem like it's really wearing on me, and it seems really devastating, and I can't quite see why this is happening in the moment. But if you take a step back and keep that perspective of, Lord, what would you have me do? And not my will, but thy will, it helps to bring this calm, this sense of serenity, realizing that, okay, I don't see the big picture just yet, but I know if I keep the faith and I keep persistent in my ideals, it will all reveal itself in time. And I think that's the beauty of this journey of each individual soul, is that we have such long lives so that everything can be revealed in due time.
It's such a simple saying or a simple thought, but it's not an easy one, because along the way we have to give up control. And I think as starting in infancy, we're taught, how do we control the elements? How do we control the elements of our life so that we're going to be safe and secure and we get the things that we want to get? And this is can almost feel like the opposite of that. So you take control. You tell me what to do. And let me have the trust that you'll control everything in my life that doesn't matter and guide me through everything that does. And it's easy to say those words, but it's not easy to say and really mean, let thy will be done. Not mine, not my way. Let me do it your way. And you show me what that way is. Such a powerful thought, and one I think that we need to consider on a day-to-day basis. Anytime we feel like we're getting confused, gee, what should I do now? Well, I think what we need to do is to step back and listen, and we'll be guided through what we need to do right now, and it'll be put right in front of us. It's a beauty.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Bill, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. It is always a pleasure listening to it. And thank you so much for joining us, as always, on Reflections.
Thank you for having me, Brent. Have a salubrious day.
Thank you.
Excellent. Okay.
All right.
Reset.
Okay. And now it is time for the thought for the day here on Reflections. And joining me for the thought for the day today, as always, is Dr. Bill Austin. Bill, thank you so much for joining us today for the thought for the day.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me. It's always a treat, Brent. Thank you.
Of course. And if you can go ahead and read the thought for the day today for our listeners.
I'd be happy to. This thought comes from reading 3492-1. There are those elements which, if applied in a material way, and if there is the activity with same of the spirit and mind, may bring into the experience of each atom of the body, force or cell itself, the awareness of the creative force or God. It may only rise as high as the ideal held by the body mind. That's quite a statement, isn't it? That there are elements within us that can be in touch with the creative forces within us, that we can actually come in contact with that. But it's really dependent on what the ideal is that we have. One of the chapters in Search for God is on cooperation. And cooperation can be a wonderful ideal to have. Are we cooperating with the creative forces, or are we trying to do it our way? There's a huge difference, between the two. And my understanding of the Cayce readings with cooperation is that we're cooperating with the creative forces within us. And that will manifest physically on the outside. And again, that last statement, it may only rise as high as the ideal held by the body mind. Which leads to the question, so what's your ideal? And is it taking you in the right direction? A lot of things to think about with this one.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for me personally, I think I want to stress the emphasis on this last sentence like you did. For me personally, I hold an ideal of being of service. I also hold an ideal of love, is that you always try to bring an ideal of love, and then also of gratitude, of being thankful for every little thing that we have in our lives, and not worrying about accumulating and consuming more things when it comes to the material things. and I love that he says it may only rise as high as the ideal held by the body mind, meaning us. That's us. That's our free will. He addresses the creative force or God in the first part of this thought, and then he stresses the emphasis of our free will. And he tends to do that a lot in his readings, where he lays out kind of how the universal creative force or God works through us, and then he always ends on, but it's all about your free will. And he did this throughout so many uh, just so many of his readings, whether he was addressing this more specifically, the creative force or God and how it affects us on our body mind level, or if he was talking about, maybe another um, popular case topic would be future predictions. And even in the future predictions, he would tell you what was going on, how there were forces that were working through us as individuals and as collective societies and countries. And then he would always say, but it always depends on the free will of individuals whether or not these things manifest and take place. And that's exactly what's going on here. It depending on how high your ideal is, and I love the way he words it, because there is no ideal that's too high. We should always constantly strive to improve, to recognize the things that aren't working for us, recognize the negative thought patterns, the addictive behaviors, the our tendency to project ourselves using our ego, to kind of shut off other people and shut off ourselves to this creative force. And I think this is very powerful in that, as long as we hold this ideal and use it as a reference for all of our interaction, as we go throughout our day, um, I think we can really do a lot to heal ourselves, and then also do a lot to bring out a really beautiful kind of creative, loving energy out into the world. And I think people will really feel that. And as individuals, I think that's one of the most powerful tools we have to instill a change into the world.
Yes. And that statement that you just made, heal ourselves, that's such a powerful one. And I think as we attune ourselves to the creative forces within us, which the readings and this particular thought say is possible, that's where the healing really takes place. And it's that attunement with the creative forces that are within us. And we have the ability to do that. And you talked about freedom of will, or freedom of choice. Are we going to listen to the thought system of our lower self or our ego? Or are we going to listen to that thought system of our higher self, which I feel is the Christ consciousness within all of us that can align us with those creative forces? And what is the ideal that we have for every aspect of ourselves to help us align ourselves with those creative forces, so that we can, as this reading is talking about, experience God within us, experience those creative forces within us? A lot to think about here.
Yeah, absolutely. And one last point I want to make is, I understand, as I interact with many people, especially of a younger generation, they have trouble resonating with prayer, meditation, the more traditional ways of working with your ideal. But I think the beauty of it is, whether you resonate with prayer, meditation, or you just are a very active person out there going constantly and having a lot of interaction with people, an ideal is something that can be carried into prayer. You can prayer using, do your prayers using an ideal as your focus. You can meditate on an ideal, use that as your focus, love, gratitude, patience, whatever it is. And then also, as you just go about your day to day, you can always carry an ideal with you. So whether you take the time, or you're going through a phase in your life where you're not taking the time to settle down and pray or meditate, this ideal is just a tool that everybody can bring. And I think if the world were to really work strongly with ideals like the Cayce material brings out, gosh, it could really create a shift in this world. And I think I think everyone is really starting to find their ideal, which is beautiful to see it happening.
That's an ideal thought there, Brent. I like it.
Yeah. Thank you, Bill. Thank you. Well, it is always a pleasure to have you on the Thought for the Day. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to share your thoughts with us.